Let's bring in Marwan Bashara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. He joins me now from London. Marwan, as we were just hearing there from Hamda, these journalists aren't just covering the story, they're living the story.
Yes, actually, in one of those times when I was watching Ismail, I remember him reporting about children's starvation and how children were telling him that they were starving, that there was no food and so on and so forth, and how he felt compelled himself not to eat. It's that much the living conditions in Gaza that basically end up eating up our journalists and other journalists in Gaza, because they are part and parcel of the fabric of the society. They're not parachuted there. They know exactly the type of society they live in, a society of refugee, a concentration camp of sort. They grow up there and they go to the available schools and university like Ismail. They study, as he did, journalism. And of course, his fellow road traveler, as it were, in the camp, Rami, again, a cameraman. You know, through their lenses and through their eyes, we've been able to see the tragedy unfold, the starvation of the children. And we've seen the reporting from the hospital, and we've seen them arrested as they reported from Al-Madani hospital and end up being tortured. And now they're assassinated. So it's tragic in every possible way. But again, it's just as tragic as what is happening to each and every one of their family member, of their co-Palestinian brothers and sisters living in Gaza or dying in Gaza.
Marwan, we've been hearing a lot about Israel's patterns here of targeting journalists, and not just journalists, but as we were saying earlier, to healthcare workers, aid workers. But specifically when we look at the attacks on the press, clearly Israel has been trying to strategically change a narrative. Has that been successful?
Well, clearly it has not been successful. The message is getting out. And Palestinians, not just journalists, by the way, but Palestinians themselves with their little cell phones are able to tell their stories. And a lot of these stories are reaching out through various forums. And that's why, you know, Israel and its friends wants to close down the likes of TikTok and other, whereby the message is getting out to people. But certainly the likes of Al Jazeera is really able to have a wider audience, reaching living rooms everywhere, and yes, laptops and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, the message has got out. But I think the logic of this pattern of killing is not just logical. There's something sadistic about what Israel is doing, right? I mean, there's a lot of good explanations, political explanations, for example, why they killed Haniya, right? Or why they continue. They don't want a ceasefire. They want a regional war. There's a fanatic fascist government that is bent on violence, and they live off violence, and they gain popularity and legitimacy within their own ranks through violence. But this sort of a targeting of journalists is not helping. And that's why I wonder, for example, why Israeli journalists are not talking about that. And let me be very clear here. I am against the killing, the targeting, the harming of any journalist anywhere, Israeli journalists, American journalists, Arab journalists, whoever they are. But when you are a witness to more than 160 journalists are getting killed a few kilometers from you in Israel, why aren't the Israeli journalists speaking out? Because at least in terms of journalism, even if you do support your government, shouldn't you be talking in unfiltered terms about the killing of journalists? Shouldn't Israeli journalists, American journalists, British journalists be talking, just like other journalists now are increasingly talking about the horrific crimes that are being carried out in Gaza? If the International Court of Justice took the case of Israel's genocide, if the International Criminal Court are pursuing Israeli leaders or the prosecutors for war crimes, why aren't journalists talking about what is happening to their fellow journalists? And here I'm talking about Israeli journalists, American journalists, and others. They need to speak out far more than they have, because it's their governments that's either carrying those crimes or aiding and abetting the killing of Christ. I just heard today, Secretary Blinken said, we have no part in this, meaning in the assassination. I'm sure they have no part in the killing of our fellow journalists. But they have every part to play in this by arming, financing, and shielding Israel. The United States is responsible for the killing of journalists in Gaza because it is the one that's arming, financing, and shielding Israel, or rather this fanatic government, as it carries its crimes in Gaza.
Marwan, if indeed word is getting out because of the brave reporting we've seen from the ground in Gaza, you mentioned earlier that there has been a shift in public opinion around this. Do you think that we could see any kind of tangible political consequence to the reporting that we've seen?
You know, there will be eventually. The question is, will it be too late? Because people are dying every day in Gaza. People are starving every day in Gaza. And the rest of it, right? I don't want to repeat every tragedy that is happening to every Palestinian family today in Gaza and the West Bank and elsewhere. So it's just that it has to happen sooner rather than later. And we really cannot wait until every other person organizes. And they have been organized. We've seen the mass demonstrations in most Western cities and throughout the world. We've seen young generations take over campuses and universities. So we've seen public opinion rises to the occasion. The problem is a good number of influential governments are not. And why? When you look at some of the faces of some of the declarations, you think they're stupid. But I have news for you. Blinken, Biden, Sunak, and today Stammer, and the rest of them, they're not stupid. They're very smart, in fact. But they're cynical. They're cynical. They're cynical because they're allowing this to happen under the pretext of whatever they have, always emphasizing that they are concerned. We are tired of hearing the word concerned as our fellow journalists, as our colleagues are killed by the Israeli military machine. Concerned is no longer good enough. They are smart. They know what's going on. They're cynical. They need to stop being cynical because the strategic calculus is not working out. The political calculus is not working out. A ceasefire has to happen, and it's not just seizing the fire. Israel has to seize the crimes. It has to seize the genocide. It has to seize the starvation. It has to seize the killing of journalists.
Marwan Bashara, there, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, joining us from London today. Thank you, Marwan.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.